I have both genes for Alzheimer's. Once I found out that, I think I lived with a small amount of terror every day.
The area that's been greatest failure has been neurodegeneration. It is a business approach. Incomes are more important than outcomes. How do you make new memories? How does learning work? The neuroanatomy of the brain, the understanding of the disease is outdated. That cognitive decline can be prevented and reversed. I was taught that diet doesn't really make that much difference. You just got to write the prescription. Everything's going to be okay. And that's just turned out to be absolutely wrong. The diet is huge. We've treated over 10,000 patients now. We know that in our trial, 84% of the people got better, 6.5 times as effective as the drug Leqembi. So it's just dramatically better than anything from before.
This is something that everyone should know about, but doesn't. Everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm really thrilled beyond measure. Dr. Dale Bredesen is here, and he's a founding president of the Buck Research Institute for Aging. He has published over 230 papers, including the first reversal of cognitive decline in patients with Alzheimer's, 2 New York Times best-selling books. I've read them both, and also a senior director of the world's first precision medicine program for neurodegenerative diseases at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. Now, I have both genes for Alzheimer's. Once I found out that in 2019, I think I lived with a small amount of terror every day until I learned about his work. And it has just, it's moved me from a place of fear to empowerment, and millions of families are facing Alzheimer's. So I just can't even tell you how grateful I am for the hope and the work you're doing. So thank you for being here again. But let's start with you. Like, what initially lit that fire in you to study Alzheimer's?
Yeah, when I was a freshman at Caltech, I got interested in the brain. I read a book called The Machinery of the Brain. So I was 18 years old. I'm in my mid 70s now. So this was many, many years ago, and read this book called The Machinery of the Brain by Wooldridge. And I thought, wow, this is so fantastic. And he talks about the similarities and differences between the way computers work and the way the brains work. So I got very interested in, how do you make new memories? How does learning work? Things like that. The neuroanatomy of the brain. It's really kind of a remarkable organ, as you know. And so then when we started studying this, I started realizing, well, wait a minute, we have nothing to offer for these degenerative diseases in all the areas of medicine. You look at cancer, you look at autoimmune diseases, you look at cardiovascular disease. The area that's been greatest failure has been neurodegeneration. If you get Alzheimer's or Lewy body or frontotemporal dementia or ALS, any of these things, they're death sentences. They have been. And so I thought, okay, we really need to understand what's going on in the brain at a fundamental level. So I ran a lab for 30 years looking at the molecular details of what drives the neurodegenerative process. And it really gave us a completely different look at what Alzheimer's is all about. And so we were looking at developing drugs for this. Was now back in 2008, 2009, around there. And as we were starting to set up the first drug trial, we had identified a drug candidate that looked quite good. And as we were starting to set up the trials, I thought, well, wait a minute. What about this? What about that? What about these other pieces? Should we also do brain training? Should we also do exercise? Should we also change? And of course, I was sitting in my office looking at the big whiteboard and writing these different pieces. And then, of course, it just hit me like, wait a minute. Why would you leave anything out when you're talking about changing this amazing network in your brain? And we've learned so much more since that time. And so, by the way, the very first patient who came to see me when we first had this idea of, okay, we need to change all these things, not just one, was in April of 2012. And it was actually a woman who was working for the CIA. And she her mother had died of Alzheimer's. She had just been diagnosed herself. And her friend sent her out and called me up and said, could she come out to see you from Washington? And I was like, we work with mice, and fruit flies and cells. I'm not sure I could help a human. We had set up to do a trial, but we had been turned down because the trial involved, fixing multiple things physiologically. And so she said, well, just please talk to her. So we spent 2.5 hours. She took all these notes. And I thought I would never hear from her again. And she got much better. She's now done 13 and a half years. She's still doing well. And she is walking across the United States to raise awareness that cognitive decline can be prevented and reversed. She's 2/3 of the way. She started at the Pacific Ocean. She's now in Louisiana, heading for Florida. And you can see her online if you go to JudyWalks, JudyWalks.org. You'll see Judy. She is amazing.
Oh,
She's
Dr.
just,
Bredesen.
yeah, just hitting 2,000 miles right now.
Oh, two
cool.
follow-up questions to that. That's incredible.
Yeah, crazy.
And how did it feel? I mean, how does it feel to have the designation of the first person to kind of reverse Alzheimer's, A? And then how many people would you say have gone through this process and have successfully reversed their Alzheimer's?
So first of all, we've had a tremendous amount of pushback because we're saying something that hadn't been said before. We're saying that, yes, there is something you can do about this. And so, old-fashioned doctors will say, no, there's nothing you can do about this. And we don't believe it. So we went from anecdotes, then we published 100 people with documented improvement. Then we did a proof of concept trial next, and that was published in 2022. That was successful. We had unprecedented improvements. Then Dr. Heather Sanderson did her own trial with the same approach, got the same results. She published that. And now we're just finishing a randomized controlled trial. And the difference between the control group that's just going downhill and the treated people who are going uphill is just striking and highly statistically significant. So that'll be published in a few months. It's going to finish October 31st, but 95% of the data are in already. So we know what's going on. And it's interesting, the results we have in this trial, if you look at the treatment effect of this sort of protocol, which is a precision medicine, you're identifying the drivers and treating them, it is 8.5 times the treatment effect of this recent so-called US pointer trial, 6.5 times as effective as the drug Leqembi, and 3.5 times as effective as the drug Donanemab, which is called Kisunla. So it's just dramatically better than anything from before. And so we're trying to get people to understand this. So of course, I've been thrilled from the first person that got better, because my whole career, I'd been told nothing can be done. But to see that something can be done is really wonderful. However, still, as they say, the pioneers are the ones with the arrows in their backs, and still feeling that in the back. They just published on the front page of the New York Times a couple of months ago. It basically published an article about how they don't believe this. So, my argument is talk to the patients. The reporter who did this, I told her I wouldn't be interviewed by her unless she would talk to a number of the patients and a number of the doctors. She did that. She spent dozens and dozens of hours talking to patients who got better and doctors who have seen it. She ignored all of that, found one patient who started at end stage and didn't get improvement and stopped after a few months and said, okay, there it is. This guy basically said I was a quack. So it's sad. And there's a lot of work to do. But the great thing is, so many times we're hearing these remarkable, unprecedented stories. We've treated over 10,000 patients now. We know that in our trial, 84% of the people got better. So most people, and this is at the stage of MCI and early dementia. So as you know, when you develop Alzheimer's, you go through 4 phases. You have a phase where you're asymptomatic, but you can pick up things in the blood work and spinal fluid and things like that. Then you have SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. By definition, that means something's not quite right, but you're still able to score normally on cognitive tests. That lasts on average 10 years. So, and that's very, very treatable. The third phase is MCI, mild cognitive impairment. By definition, that means you're starting to score abnormally on the cognitive testing, but you still have your activities of daily living. You can still balance your checkbook and drive your car and do your job and all that sort of stuff. Then the final stage is dementia, where you're now losing those. And so the people in the trial were at the third stage, MCI, and early dementia. That's the same as for the drug trial. So we did basically the same group as is done for these drug trials. So we could say, look, this is far better than drugs. But for practical things, you want to start during the first 2 stages. This is why we recommend everybody get checked. If you're 35 or over, get checked, get on active prevention. Nobody should have to deal with the dementia phase. It's kind of like saying, let's wait to treat cancer until it's widely metastatic. Why would you do that? Look at the tremendous difference in medicine that a pap smear made. Look at cervical cancer used to be a major reason for women to die. Now, very, very few people ever die of cervical cancer because you have pap smears. Chest x-rays, looking at your PSA, looking at your ApoB and your lipid profiles, looking at hemoglobin A1C. You can prevent people from getting full-on diabetes by intervening early. This is where medicine is now. And it's unfortunate that in the Alzheimer field, people are trying to hold it back and say, no, there's nothing that can be done. So there's a tremendous amount we can do.
Yes. And thank you for being so brave and persevering despite those arrows in your back. And like you said, this is always how it goes, right? The first people are just going to be attacked. But so what is wrong? I know you said Leqembi. I want to get into a few of those things. I have very specific questions and your approach. But first, what is wrong with the conventional approach? If you can kind of give an overview. I mean, you alluded to some, but if you can just sum it up, what are we doing wrong? What have we been doing wrong?
2 things wrong. Number 1, the understanding of the disease is outdated. So that the disease, people say, oh, it's caused by amyloid. You make amyloid for no apparent reason, and then that causes the disease. Well, it is a mediator. It's just like saying, when your cytokines get activated because you're having an infection. Oh, it's the cytokines that are causing the problem. No, it's the infection that are causing you to make the cytokines. So that's the first thing. The second thing is people have been pushing these antibodies for business reasons, not health reasons. And that's unfortunate. So if you look at the data, just look at the data that were generated. First of all, the antibodies don't make you better. They slow the decline. That's the best thing that they do. How much do they slow? Leqembi that you mentioned, in women, 11%, almost nothing. In men, it actually did a little better. In people who are ApoE44, it didn't help them at all. And there's some evidence that it made them worse than nothing. So, and yet, even though people with 4/4 should never be taking Leqembi, it's recommended every day by doctors who realize that there's publications showing that it didn't help the 4/4s, but they still recommend it. That is sad.
What if you have a 2/4 or a 3/4? Is there any better prognosis?
Yes. So the people with the 4/4s did worse with the antibodies, then the single 4s, and then the non-4s. So if look, the best case scenario would be you're relatively early on, you're a male, and you're ApoE4 negative, so you have a little less likelihood of getting the brain bleeding that is associated with ApoE4 with this. And you don't want to do anything else. You don't want to do all the things that we know will help you. You just want a drug to get injected, and you don't mind paying $50,000 a year, which is about what's by the time you get all the injections and all the follow-up MRIs and the infusions and all that, you're looking at about $50,000 a year. So again, this is not an optimal medical approach. It is a business approach. Unfortunately. So my hope is in the long run, we will be combining the best of the targeted therapeutics with precision medicine protocols so that we can get the best outcomes. And I think that's where things are headed.
Perfect. And just 2 follow-up questions to that. Can you describe the difference between something that is statistically significant and clinically meaningful? And how these drugs go about being approved in the first place?
Yeah, this is a really important point. I'm glad you brought it up. So as they've pointed out, the effects of these antibodies are not clinically significant. They're statistically significant. So what happens is when you do enough people, and that's why you calculate the treatment effect. And as I say, when we do that, the treatment effects of these antibodies is almost nothing, whereas the treatment effect of the protocols we use is actually high. So the big difference. And that's why in those trials, they're using 1,500 or 2,000 people because there's such a tiny effect that it takes that many people to find statistical significance. But when you say, well, is it clinically meaningful? Do the families notice any difference? The answer is no. They use an 18-point scale, and it's less than half a point on that scale of a difference that this made. So it's a tiny, tiny difference. That is the problem. And again, I think understanding the disease better will tell us how to use those drugs better. What doses may actually help, when to use it. Since you're really dealing with a response of the body to these various insults, infections and toxins and things like that, first you want to optimize everything else, get rid of these various exposures. Now to bring these in and slowly remove that amyloid, not such a bad idea. But the idea of going after this, it's a little bit like, imagine that you have imagine that you have tuberculosis, and your body's responded to that by making these various so-called granulomas. Just sucking out the granulomas is not that great of an idea as long as you continue to be exposed to the TB. The granulomas are fighting the TB. So the amyloid is fighting these various insults, and we want to do both. Fine to get rid of the amyloid, but make sure you've gotten rid of the insults as well.
Perfect. And I know for the MAB, or the monoclonal antibody before Leqembi, that there was a little controversy over the approval process. It was not approved, right? Can you just tell us the story about how that unfolded? And I guess it resulted in some retiring for some of the people on the board. Can you describe that to us?
Yeah. So, the first one was bapineuzumab years ago, and that one completely failed. Solanezumab completely failed. Gantenerumab completely failed. Crenezumab completely failed. Then, as you mentioned, Aducanumab, that was the first one where, by the way, it did fail. And then they re-looked at the data and they said, well, if we do it a certain way, it looks like it's having a tiny effect, but maybe enough that we can sell it. And so they applied for approval. And as you indicated, the effect was so tiny. There was an 11-member independent board that was brought on by the FDA and said, okay, you guys are independent. You look at all the data and tell us, should we, so they're recommending to the FDA, should we approve it or not? 0 of the 11 recommended approval. They all said, no, there's not enough effect. It's got too many side effects. Do not approve this drug. The FDA was convinced by the corporate entities, approve it anyway. And 3 of the 11 members resigned in protest over that. So, again, it's unfortunate, but we hear it all the time. That unfortunately, sometimes incomes are more important than outcomes. In medicine, we want to focus on the outcomes, not on the incomes. And so we've got to get that if we're going to be getting the best outcomes for people. So what happened was there was this whole argument about Aducanumab, and then of course the EU said we're not going to pay for it. Medicare said we're not going to pay for it. Multiple groups. Well, then they came up with the next one, which was Leqembi that you mentioned. And Leqembi does do a little better than Aducanumab. And so that one did get approval. And actually the consulting board felt that it should be approved as well, because at least there was something you could hang your hat on. Now, the effect is still tiny, and it's with lots of side effects. Microhemorrhages in the brain in many people, somewhere around 40% of people. So lots of microhemorrhage in the brain, especially the ApoE4 positives.
Yep.
And then it also causes brain swelling in many people. It causes brain atrophy in many people. And then unfortunately, it's caused several deaths. So it's got not a very good side effect profile. And then Donanemab came along, which is now called Kisunla. This one is from Lilly. And that actually does seem to be still a little better. So they're getting a little better improvements. So these things are at least something. They're a beginning, but the effect is very small. And we know we can do much, much better by identifying and addressing what's actually causing the problem.
Yes, perfect. One last question. I don't mean to get you in trouble, but it's something I've often wondered about because we know about the link between heart disease and brain health, high levels of ApoB. What are your thoughts on statins? And are they helpful, or do they potentially have deleterious effects for the brain?
Yeah, that's a great point. And there are a number of studies published on statins, and interestingly, some of the studies suggest an increase in risk for cognitive decline. Some of them suggest a decrease in the risk for cognitive decline. And so it looks like what's going on here is it has both a positive and negative effect. So it depends on which one is dominant in the population they're looking at. So here's the thing. We know that when you have dyslipidemia, you're at increased risk for stroke, for microthrombi, for cognitive decline, all those sorts of things. And so we want to address that. But do we want to do it with statins? Well, statins are not the top choice. So there's so much you can do before that. And in fact, one of the things we found in our trials was that many of the people who were doing the right diet and exercise and sleep and stress reduction, all these things, were able to come off their statins. They didn't need them because these things are like unnatural. They're not addressing the physiological reason. So if you have dyslipidemia, okay, you start with basics, your diet, exercise, getting on the right things. You can do so much better. If that doesn't work, there are all sorts of things like bergamot that can help you reduce those levels, reducing your inflammatory status, things like resolvins and fish oils and vitamin D and things like that. That can be helpful. And of course, I recommend to everyone, if you're 35 or over, get a cognoscopy, look where you stand, but also check out your heart, get a calcium score. Look, if your calcium score is 0, which so many people do have a 0 calcium score, that buys you about 5 years. It says you're highly unlikely to have any cardiac event in the next 5 years. Okay, after 5 years, recheck it. If there's a question, get us vessels so that you will know. Then if there's a problem there and you're still wanting to lower your cholesterol, lower your LDL, improve your ApoB, fine. If you've already tried bergamot, then you can move to things like Zetia. So Zetia just reduces the uptake of the cholesterol from the gut. For many people, that's plenty. That's all that they're going to need. Doing the right things and including either bergamot or Zetia or things like that will do very, very well. For people where that's still not enough, yes, you could consider a statin or even ultimately a PCSK9 inhibitor like Repatha. But if you're going to do those, don't over-statinize. I see this all the time. People have an abnormally low lipid status, an abnormally low cholesterol because they've been over-statinized. Again, we want to focus on what's physiologically functional, not what is as low as you can get it. Some of the cardiologists will say, well, we just want the cholesterol as low as we can get it. Hey, we'd like it to be 0. Like, no, that's not the way human bodies function. That's kind of silly. So, honor the physiology of the situation. And we don't really like to see the total cholesterols come below 150. We'd like to see your ApoB be optimal, more like in the 70s or 80s, that sort of thing, not 110, that sort of thing. So, can you drive it lower? Yes, but is it really a good thing for your brain and for your body in the long run? Probably not.
Fair. I love that approach. And so let's get to what you've discovered about roof leaks and all of these different contributing factors. So me, as someone with both genes, ApoE4, how much of this is genetic? And talk about the many factors that you found to be maybe even more impactful.
Yeah, such a good point, because the genetics just tells you your risk. So if you're ApoE4, and then 7 million Americans are ApoE4, and I hope that you've joined ApoE4.info, was founded by my good friend Julie G. I've been working with Julie for years. She, as you probably know, has gone from 35th percentile in her cognition to 98th percentile. She wrote part of the second book with me, the handbook part with me, and also with my wife, who's an integrative physician. So the two of them work together all the time. And I'm really so grateful to Julie because she's really a citizen scientist, and she's someone who's looked into this and shown what you can do for yourself with her own numbers and her own ability to show how much better she's gotten and how much better she has stayed. She's been on the protocol for over 13 years now. She actually started it herself before I met her. And then as we published the first time, she contacted me when we came out with the first paper, and we've been working together ever since. So, the simple genetics, there are 100 different genes that have impact on your risk for Alzheimer's. But as you indicated, it's the ApoE4 that's the common one, that's the most impactful factor. If you have 0 copies, and that's 3/4 of the population, then your chance of developing Alzheimer's during your lifetime is about 9%. Not 0, but it's not too high. If you have 1 copy, that's 75 million Americans. Your risk is 30%. If you have 2 copies, and that's 7 million Americans, your risk, if you do nothing, if you just do standard American lifestyle, is about 90% by the time you turn 80. So, okay, don't worry. We should be able to get it close to 0. Get checked early. If as you hit 35, there's 2 sets of tests you can do. One that tells you where you stand, the other one that tells you where you're headed. Incredibly helpful. I just had this done on myself recently so I could see where I stand and make sure. I'm now in my mid-70s, as I mentioned. So I want to make sure that I'm okay for years going forward. So even though there's this 90% risk, that's if you do nothing. If you do the right things. And I have to say, we have an amazing result that just happened a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Cyrus Raji is a wonderful neuroradiologist out of WashU, and he does these ASLs, which are arterial spin labeling. They're very sensitive. It's an MRI technique, very sensitive for Alzheimer's and pre-Alzheimer's. And we have a patient now, 67-year-old man, who had already had MCI. So he's already at the 3rd of 4 stages. Got treated, improved with his cognition. His ASL before he started was clearly abnormal, classic for Alzheimer's. You see this reduction in blood flow in the area called the precuneus, and that's what he had. Then, after he was on the protocol for several years, and it was being seen by Dr. David Merrill, by Dr. Heather Sanderson and Rachel Huestner, dramatic improvements. He has a completely normal ASL. I don't think that's ever been documented before. And it's just so striking to see this thing that's so sensitive come completely back to normal. So again, don't wait to MCI, get evaluated. The good news is you only have to check every 5 years. When you hit 60, okay, switch it to every 2 years, just so you kind of stay on top of it. But remember that when hemoglobin A1C appeared back in, it was around the 1970s, so it was around 50 years ago, people started doing this routinely. Now you could see diabetes coming before you had full-on diabetes. Now you had pre-diabetes. And then, of course, when people started doing fasting insulins, now you can see pre-diabetes. So you don't ever have to wait to get the retinal damage, the vascular damage, the renal damage of full-on diabetes because you can pick it up early. That's exactly what's happening in Alzheimer's. We can now pick things up early and make sure that you never progress to full-on dementia by looking at these things. So it's a new era, and people have to realize that, hey, don't worry, take a deep breath. Things are going to be okay. But the most important thing you can do is be active.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that and your cognoscopy and what markers they should be tracking. But I just have to tell people, it's because I read your book and because I learned about p-tau 217 that I was able to identify this in someone I love deeply, deeply at a very, very early stage. And like you said, this is something that everyone should know about, but doesn't. So we're going to get there. But can you tell us, you say there's like 30 different, at least in your first book, and maybe this has been updated, there's like 30 different holes we can plug or things to look at. Do you want to tell people about some of those most impactful things or whatever you think would be the most helpful for them?
Yeah, great point. So this all came out of test tube research. We were looking at what is the actual nature of Alzheimer's? What is this all about? And how does it relate to normal cognition? And the surprise was that these simple ideas, oh, it's just about amyloid, it's just about tau, it's just about free radicals, it's just about herpes, it's just type 3 diabetes, all these, none of those has led to a successful treatment. What we realize is that it's not quite that simple. This is a network insufficiency. You've got all these things. I mentioned initially 36 holes. So there are all these mechanisms that contribute. You know, if you're exposed to mycotoxins, if you're exposed to air pollution, if you've got sleep apnea, if you've got a leaky gut, I mean, all these things are critical. But what they're driving is you have a supply and you have a demand. And what happens is, as your supply goes down as you're aging, as your demand goes up because of inflammation and needing to detox and things like that, you pass a point where instead of being on the side of making new synapses, keeping and maintaining those, you're now pulling back. And what we found in the research is fascinating. You literally have a whole mode change. So just, you know, when you go from sleep to wakefulness, those are two different things. There's a whole set of things in sleep. You know, you breathe differently. Your hormones are changing a little bit. You know, all these things are changing. You may go into ketosis during your sleep. All these things change. Then you wake up. Now your adrenaline starts to come up. Your cortisol starts to come up. Now you're active. It's a different thing. We found the same thing with Alzheimer's. You have a side of connection where things are lined up to make and support connectivity in your brain. When you have various insults, you switch from connection to protection. And so now you make the amyloid that kills the microbes. You make the p-tau. The phospho-tau is basically there to kill microbes. That's what it's doing. It's helping to protect you as you go from connection to protection. So we want, when we see patients who are having some degree of decline, we want to bring up their supply and bring down that demand, bringing down the inflammation, getting rid of the microbes, getting rid of the toxin exposures, things like that. And so, as you mentioned, you know, originally it was these 36 holes. What we found is, as you start closing these, and a drug could be a great way to close one hole, but what about the other 35? You know, you gotta not forget those. So as we start doing this, you get to a certain point where you now get over the threshold, and now they all snap shut. Things are better. You've gone back into connectivity and away from just focusing on protection. And so that's the whole idea. And so we find that most of these things are grouped into three main areas. It's things that reduce your energetics, reduce blood flow, reduce oxygenation, reduce mitochondrial function, all of that. It's increased inflammation, all sorts of organisms and leaky gut and sinusitis and things like that. And then it's increased toxin exposure. And that's the inorganics like air pollution and mercury. It's the organics like microplastics, glyphosate, toluene, benzene, stuff like that. And then it's and even things like anesthetic agents and herbicides and pesticides. And then it's the biotoxins, things made by organisms like mold species, for example, where they actually, these things actually can damage your brain. So if you address those three huge areas, that's when we see the best outcomes.
Yeah, and I love that part in your book, The Ageless Brain. I just reread it for the second time, where mold is a very big deal, and it took a long time for people to understand it, but now it's definitely becoming more recognized. And this is a food show, Dr. Bredesen. So I like people to start with food.
Great.
So will you tell me KetoFlex, or maybe start with what you think the most damaging foods most people could be eating are for the brain, and then tell us about your KetoFlex approach and how someone might begin.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, we do start in the 7 basics. We start, diet, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training, detox, and some targeted supplements. So food is number one, just as you said. And if not the number one, it's the number one or number two drivers of cognitive decline is metabolic dysfunction. It's the standard American diet. And, you can just follow the mechanisms. That's what we've always been interested in the lab, following the mechanisms. How does this work? Think about it for a moment. You're now taking stuff, ultra processed food to begin with. You're actually damaging your gut. You're changing your oral microbiome. You're reducing your ability to detox, reducing your fiber consumption, for example. You're reducing your phytonutrients, your polyphenols and things like this. So you've got all these different mechanisms. You're creating inflammation. You're creating liver damage, liver adiposity. You're creating, visceral fat. You've got this metabolic syndrome with ongoing systemic inflammation. And inflammation in your brain is what's driving you into this state where you're now downsizing. So all of these mechanisms it's essentially giving yourself Alzheimer's. And I wrote a chapter in the very first book, The End of Alzheimer's, how to give yourself Alzheimer's. If you want to do it, I hope not too many people would want to do that, but if you really wanted to do it, here's how you can do it. And it starts with eating a standard American diet, get those French fries in, get those cheeseburgers, get that inflammation, get those AGEs, all that sort of stuff. So there's no question that has a huge impact. And, unfortunately in medical school, I was taught that diet doesn't really make that much difference. You just got to write the prescription. Everything's going to be okay. And that's just turned out to be absolutely wrong. The diet is huge. So we looked at, okay, what's the best biochemical approach to giving you the optimal dietary part of patching those 36 holes? And you can do a lot with your diet alone. And so you start with, you want it to be a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. Now, I have nothing against pure carnivorous diets. If for someone who's having, for example, autoimmunity, some people have responded. But so far, there's never been a single publication to show, here's someone with cognitive decline, they went on a carnivorous diet and they got better. So all we're looking at is, and maybe someday there will be, great, then we'll use it. But for now, the thing that has given the best outcomes is, as you mentioned, KetoFlex 12-3. Here's what that means. It's a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. We encourage people, you want to have some wild-caught fish, low mercury, great. You don't want to have farm, you want wild-caught. You want to have some pastured eggs, great. You want to have some pastured chicken, great. Not full of toxins. You want to have some grass-fed beef, fine. But the dominant part, it's plant-rich, mildly ketogenic. Why mildly ketogenic? We need to make people metabolically flexible. That's the key. And actually, my wife, who's a wonderful integrative physician, taught me years ago. She said, it's not just about ketosis, it's about metabolic flexibility. And she was absolutely right. So here's what's interesting about your brain. It's like a Prius. It's like a hybrid. So it only functions on two things. It functions on glucose, it functions on ketones. Now, for most of your life, you're doing well, you're using the glucose, now you go to bed, your glucose is going down, your ketones kick in, you're fine. You go back and forth, so you're metabolically flexible. When we see people with cognitive change, even early on, they typically have lost both of those. So I tell them, look, this is an emergency. You have a metabolic emergency. You can't utilize glucose appropriately, and you can't make ketones either. So you're really in a bad situation. So we want to make you metabolically flexible. So this is why at the beginning, we just give people exogenous ketones, because it takes them a month or two to make the endogenous ketones, get it so that they're metabolically flexible again. Many of them will have high insulin levels and have high HOMA-IRs, indicating insulin resistance. And again, you can measure this biochemically and show in the blood that people, and this has been done years ago, very nice work out of UC San Francisco, showing that you actually have a diabetic sort of insulin resistance in the brain when you have cognitive decline. So we want to now get you, this is why the plant-rich, mildly ketogenic part, it helps your toxicity, it helps your glycemic status, it helps your lipid profile. It helps your gut health. As you know, so much you can do with this plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. Now, we want you to have some period of fasting. 12 hours is a minimum. It gives you time to cleanse your brain and things like that. And again, we see this helping again and again and again. You don't want to be eating right up until bedtime. That's why it's KetoFlex 12-3. The 12 is the minimal fast, and 3 hours of fasting before bedtime. That's where the 12 and 3 come from. And this sort of approach has helped people. We have one in our trial. One of the excellent nutritionists is a woman named Kia Sanford. She's done a great job. She works with Dr. Ann Hathaway at one of the 6 sites around the country. And she's just known for her ability to get people to be metabolically flexible and get them into plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. Fantastic. We'd like to see, for people who already have symptoms, we'd like to see your ketones above 1.0 millimolar BHB. And most people are able to do that. But at the beginning, just do some exogenous until you get into endogenous. For people who are not symptomatic at all and no p-tau issues or any of that stuff, yeah, fine. Be at 0.7, 0.8, 0.9. You don't want to be at 0. And if you can just get there at least once during the day, at least so that you can go back and be metabolically flexible and make sure you don't have insulin resistance, it does make a big difference. It's part of what drives the energetics for your brain function.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. That was so great. Can you tell us, I've heard for ApoE4, I need a little bit more fasting time. I might need a little bit longer, a little bit shorter eating window. Can you tell me, is there a mechanism? Do we know why? And then take me through a day in meals. Like, tell people how many fruits and vegetables, half cup servings. What would your meal look like for the day?
Yeah, great point. So first of all, yes, people who are ApoE4 positive actually absorb fat a little better. So in fact, ApoE4, for 96% of our evolution as hominids, we were all ApoE4. It's only been in the last few percentage, so it's about 220,000 years ago, ApoE3 first appeared, and then about 80,000 years ago, ApoE2 first appeared. So for the vast majority of our time as hominids, we've all been ApoE4. And it is a pro-inflammatory gene. So it's protecting you. And so it allowed people to eat uncooked meat before there was, fire and cooking meat. It allowed people to fight against their food and their enemies, get puncture their feet, puncture their bodies, and yet survive because they had this pro-inflammatory state. But when you have a chronically pro-inflammatory state, that is going to increase your risk for cardiac disease, increase your risk for cognitive decline. So, okay, no problem. We can reduce those. And yes, you want to go for 14 to 16 hours. So that basically gives you 8 to 10 hours of your time window. So yeah, you can have a meal at, 9 a.m. and finish by 7 p.m., that sort of thing. That still gives you 14 hours of fasting overnight. And some people like to do it where they take, a whole day of fasting. Fine. Be really careful. What we found is there's a big difference between people who have some fat to burn and they can get into ketosis. They have no problem with doing some fasting versus those who are frail. We have a lot of people who are coming in who have early cognitive changes, but they're already, and especially the 70-somethings and 80-somethings and 90-somethings, as opposed to the 40-somethings and 50-somethings. And by the way, one of the most common things we see now is women in their 50s. Very, very common. And to some extent, men in their 50s as well. Of course, Alzheimer's about 2 to 1 women to men. So it is, as Maria Shriver has pointed out, this is a woman-centric disease. And as she's pointed out, about 60% of the caregivers are women as well. So, women in their 50s are at risk for cognitive decline, even in their 40s. And recent studies have shown you can pick up the earliest changes that will, decades down the road, be associated with Alzheimer's in the 20s. So even though we think about this as, old timers disease, this is a disease that gets diagnosed older, but starts early on. And so there's so much we can do now with early markers, with making sure that we optimize the basic things to avoid this.
I love it. And so 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables, if you're talking like, or not fruits, sorry, vegetables.
But vegetables, yeah. So go back. I like, Terry Walls is a good example. Terry has a wonderful diet for MS, which she's done great work on MS. And yeah, so, 9 cups, we want vegetables. So you take your plate, and we have some wonderful pictures of this, for example, in the End of Alzheimer's program, which Julie wrote the handbook for. Julie and my wife wrote the handbook for that book. And so you look at the plate, it should have mostly multiple colors of vegetables. You want to get your sulfur vegetables, your crucifers in there. You want to get your low glycemic vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, leafy greens, big salads. Those are all key. And then you can have some protein as well. Some, of course, are going to like to do that with beans and things like that. With things like kidney beans and garbanzo beans and stuff like that. Some will want to do it with tofu. Others will want to do it with pastured chicken or with wild caught fish. I happen to like some of the wild caught fish myself, but everybody has different tastes. There's all sorts of good workarounds. You can decide based on your taste. You just don't want to shovel in major ultra processed food and major simple carbs. You want to stay away from that. So that's one of the things that's come up with the diet. So what Julie has always recommended and what has worked best for us is to avoid dairy because it can be inflammatory, avoid grains because they can also be inflammatory and can cause gut issues for some people, and avoid simple carbs. Those are kind of the big three that you want to be really, really careful about. Complex carbs, fine. Vegetables should be the major thing that you're consuming. Now, if you're going to get into fruit, just be careful. This is where checking your ketone level can be helpful.
Yeah.
If you're eating too much sweet fruit, so we tend to stay away from tropical fruits like pineapples. But for all fruits, they've got wonderful fiber. They've got so many wonderful products in the fruits that can be antioxidants and protectants of your system. So great. You may want to have an apple which has got some quercetin in it, for example. You may want to have some blueberries. All sorts of research done on blueberries and strawberries and raspberries as being protective, and just people who ate more of those tended to do well as well. So you don't want to overdo it with those and get yourself so that you've got too much carb on board, but they've got some good fiber, and so in general it's been fine. You do want to be careful about high fructose corn syrup. That's an important one to avoid. And some wonderful work by Dr. Rick Johnson, a professor at University of Colorado, and Rob Lustig, a professor at University of California, San Francisco, showing how damaging fructose is. So again, when you're taking it as part of fruit with a lot of fiber, not such a problem. When you're taking it as high fructose corn syrup, it's a huge problem. And in fact, as Rick has shown and published, you look at the characteristics of what fructose does, high amounts of fructose do to your system. They just match up beautifully with what Alzheimer's does, even to the point of where in your brain the effects are and what sorts of impacts it has on PET scans and things like that. So really interesting work that he's done on this. And of course, Dr. David Perlmutter has written a whole book, Drop Acid, on this whole phenomenon. So I think that the research is really pretty clear on the negative impact of too much fructose. So you want to avoid those things. And then on the other hand, you want to support, vegetables. And typically what most people find most helpful is 2 meals a day. Some people are the so-called OMAD with 1 meal a day. And some people say, no, I really want to have 3 meals or even multiple small meals. No problem. Give yourself time though to detox at night. And make sure that you're having this plant-rich, mildly ketogenic approach with high vegetables, protein. Typically, you're going to end up with something like 65 to 70% of your calories will come from good fats, things like avocados and there of course there's some controversy about things like olive oil because it is a processed food phenomenon, but it also has been shown, these polyunsaturates have been shown to be helpful. The omega-3s, especially in oleic acid and things like that, omega-9s, omega-3s, things like that. So so you want to have those sorts of things, and then about 20% are going to be from protein. And again, there's as big controversy. Are you looking for 1 gram per kilogram, or are you looking for 1 gram per pound? And it depends. And so adjust it to you. If you are young and you're a weightlifter and you're pounding the pavement all the time, you're going to probably want more. If you've just had an operation and you're rebuilding tissue, you're going to want more. If you are an older person who's not absorbing it as well, you're going to want more. But for those of us, for people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and aren't doing weight training every day, you're probably going to be more around the area of 1 gram per kilogram instead of 1 gram per pound. So again, adjust it to you. That's the best way to do it. If you're going to go too high in people that don't need it, then what you'll find is that your glucose can drift up a little bit. So you're going to want to be careful about that. But again, the great news is with all the wearables, with all the labs that we can now even get, you don't even have a doctor to order the labs, that you can get so many of these lab tests. Any lab test now is one of the examples that does such a great job with these. So you can look at these different things. There's so much we can all do to optimize. Biohacking has turned out to be helpful. And look, if you do biohacking with your doctor and with your team, you can do even much better to get you on an optimal track. So that's the sort of the day. Typical day is going to be, 2 meals, lots of vegetables, some fruit, to include some meat in there, but plant rich. 70-20-10 is kind of the typical split. Some people will do more like 65-20-15. That's another way to go, with 15 being the overall carbs. The great news, you can go for free on, for example, Chronometer. I like that one, but there are others. Yeah, so you can find out, where do I stand with my choline? Choline is one of the common ones that's too low for most of us. And guess what? It's critical for acetylcholine, which is low in Alzheimer's and is the critical transmitter for memory. So important to get enough choline. Most of us are getting about 300, 350 milligrams. We should be up more like at 550. So you may want to take some citicoline or some alpha GPC or higher cholinergic diet. You can get it with pastured eggs and things like that. Liver is another good source. Again, you can just continue to optimize and tweak so that for your whole life, you do very well.
Yes, I love that. That's one of my favorite tips, is just because nutrient deficiency is another lever, I'm sure, with vitamin D, like you said, choline, omega-3 fatty acids. So I want to get to the kind of labs we should be tracking to end this. But first, because, exercise, infection, sleep, what are the 3 levers other than diet you would say people should prioritize and kind of really dial in if they're trying to prevent Alzheimer's or even, correct it?
Yeah. So we always talk about 7 basics, the B7, the basic 7, and we can go through. So the next 3. So you mentioned diet. That's number 1. Exercise. It's a huge impact on cognitive decline. You need the blood flow. You need the insulin sensitivity that it helps to give you. You need all that aerobic support and the strength training. So exercise is huge. Sleep. So sleep, you want to track 4 things. And I check mine every morning. So you want to have at least 7 hours of sleep at night. You want to have at least 90 minutes of REM. You want to have at least 60 minutes of deep sleep. And you want to have at least an SpO2, in other words, your oxygen saturation of 94%. If you hit those 4 things every night, you're doing great with your sleep. And if there's any question, please get checked for sleep apnea. It's easy. You can do it at your own home now. The published claim has been that 80% of sleep apnea goes undiagnosed. So it is a huge player, a common one. And as you know, it increases risk not only for cognitive decline, but for hypertension, vascular disease. It's a huge problem. Even things like esophagitis, GERD, even esophageal carcinoma. So it's a good idea to make sure that you don't have that particular problem. So sleep and then stress. So, we were made, so, those are the next 3, stress being the third. We were made to do acute stress resolution, acute stress resolution. Humans handle that very well. We were not evolutionarily designed for stress, chronic, unremitting stress. And so many of us have it. Oh my gosh, the job, and it's the pandemic, and it's the children, and it's the grandchildren, it's all the issues that are just contributing to this chronic, unremitting stress. No, you've got to get away from that. Just, chill. Several years ago, I had some, heavy duty stress and it had some heart arrhythmias due to it. Okay, I talked to a wonderful cardiologist, Dr. Mimi Guarnero. We figured out what was going wrong. Never had a problem since then. Okay,
Right.
these things, they occur for a reason. And so these things are things you can deal with. The other three on the basics that we talk about, the B7, are brain training or just brain stimulation is important. Detox, some basic detox things, and then some targeted supplements, things like resolvents, things that you can do to optimize your own biochemistry.
Perfect. And this to end, tell us about those markers, those maybe new and evolving markers that people should be tracking.
Yes.
And also, do you have any wearables? I mean, I use an Oura
As an
ring.
Apple Watch. You can use an Oura ring. You can use an Apple Watch, Garmin, Fitbit. You take your pick, but you want to be able to track those things. I like to track HRV is one of the things I find very helpful because that tells you, are you stressed out all day? You want to know that you've got some vagal tone, some parasympathetics, not just some sympathetic activity. So that's really helpful. So yeah, wearables for anyone, they're being very helpful. Now you mentioned blood tests. So yeah, there's two types, as I mentioned. One is, where do I stand? One is, where am I headed? Where do I stand? There are now 4, thank goodness, because it used to be you had to have a spinal tap. I mean, do you want to have a spinal tap every couple of years? I don't. So, okay, so you can get these 4 blood tests. p-tau 217, make sure, and there are some very sensitive ones. I happen to like NeuroCODE because it's got the most sensitive, but there are others. Precivity has one, and LabCorp and Quest have their own. They don't have as much validation or sensitivity, unfortunately. I look forward to the day they will. There's a new one coming out called Super p-tau 217, should be out by the end of this year. So it'll look even earlier, which will be fantastic. Then the second one is A-beta 42:40 ratio. So it's 42:40 ratio. That goes down as you're heading for Alzheimer's. The third one is GFAP. That is separate. It tells you if you've got inflammation in the brain. And then the fourth one is NFL, neurofilament light. That tells you whether you have damage to the neurons. The great news is you put those together, you get a beautiful profile of what's going on inside your skull, which hasn't been available really until the last year and a half. So it's really been great to have those. So that you want to know that status of that. We do that with something called brain scan. So you can go on getabrainscan.com and get those tests easily. You can even do it. You don't even need a doctor. They have a local draw station. There's a doctor who oversees it and follows up, etc. Then the second one is, where am I headed? And the easy thing to do there, go on to mycqtest.com. So that's a free online cognitive assessment. It's about 20 minutes or so. It tells you, are you struggling? Because these things do tend to sneak up on you. And then it will tell you, okay, which blood test do you need for that specific result that you have? And yes, you want to know the basics. You want to know, do I have ongoing inflammation? And then if so, you want to know what are the organisms creating this? And you want to treat those. You want to look at your oral microbiome. So you want to look at inflammatory pieces. HSCRP is the common one that people use. Then you want to look at your detox status, things like homocysteine, things like TGF-beta1, which tells you whether you've got some inflammation due to biotoxins. You want to look at your hormone status, your nutrient status. You mentioned vitamin D. Most of us are deficient in potassium, many in iodine, magnesium, zinc, and choline. Those are the big 5 that most of us are going to be a little bit deficient in, and so we're going to want to address that. And you want to find out your vitamin D level is one of them, because low vitamin D is associated with increased risk for cognitive decline. So there's, again, something that can be addressed very easily. Helpful to know your omega-3 status. If you've got a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, that is pro-inflammatory. If you've got a very low omega-3 index, you're down at 2 or 3, that is also a concern. You want to have more omega-3s in your membranes. So that's the second group that will tell you where you're headed based on what your status is. So together, you really have a great look. Where am I now? Where am I headed? What can I do about it?
Yes, everyone, I highly recommend you take that seriously and take everything he's saying in, because I do think, as you've stated before, that Alzheimer's is now optional. And I think that's so
Yeah.
powerful. So as we end up the conversation, can you tell us where we can connect with you? Tell us about your books, maybe one last note on the clinical trial, and then end with a word. What would you say to anyone dealing with Alzheimer's now, or tell us what the world would look like if they finally took your work seriously on a very large scale?
Yeah, of course, the goal is to reduce the global burden of dementia. That's the whole goal. And, we're getting there. But yes, there's a lot of pushback. We've got too many people saying, no, 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 don't do anything. There's nothing can be done, which is unfortunate. So I would recommend for anyone who's in late stages, please make sure, get all your children evaluated. Let's make sure that you end it with that generation. But I would also say we've seen people go from MoCA scores of 0, people who are late stage and improve. They don't come back all the way to normal, but they can dress themselves again, and they become continent again, and they interact with their families again. So there's something that can be done for the majority of people. In our trials, about 80% of people improved. In general practice, the people that have been trained, we're looking at more like 50%. But again, the earlier you start, the easier it is, the more complete it is. So the most important thing you can do, don't stick your head in the sand. And as you mentioned, you can read some books. The End of Alzheimer's program was the second one. The third one was called The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. And the last one is, as you mentioned, The Ageless Brain, which was trying to say to everybody, let's make sure that our brain span is as long as our lifespan. You don't want to have a lifespan where you don't have the brain span that's the same length, because it's, of course, it's horrible for you and for the family. So again, so much that can be done, and starting early, being active is going to make all the difference.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight that if a drug had a 50 or 80% success rate, that'd be incredible. So, and I just can't wait till your clinical trial. This one, you said, wraps up on October 31st, and then we should see it in the literature soon thereafter.
Yeah, so it'll be posted as a preprint in December, and then it will be out as a peer-reviewed paper probably around April, depending on how many times we have to revise it and what the reviewers say. But those are the approximate times.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Bredesen. Like I said, you give us so much hope, and your work is so incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Autumn. Let's keep on making things optimized. Keep optimizing things, and you should do well to 100.
Thank you. Oh yeah, just like